Going in to hear their fate. They've waited years for today. The chance to appeal their criminal conviction for stealing after the Post Office prosecuted them for anomalies in their accounting caused by a fault in the Post Office's Horizon software. They entered the court as criminals, but walk out as innocent people.
I'm not a criminal anymore.
I got my life back.
It's hard to put into words what these families have been through in this long wait for justice. Shame, rejection, prison, debt, and in some cases, dying before being exonerated.
All the courts now have said that my husband was right. He said to me, I want my name cleared. Anything else is a bonus. I want my name cleared. And I promised him that. I promised him that the week before he died.
The 39 former sub-postmasters had been complaining of glitches in the Horizon computer system that meant thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of pounds were unaccounted for. The judgment today said the Post Office knew there were serious issues with the reliability of the Horizon software, but effectively steamrolled over any sub-postmaster who sought to challenge its accuracy.
We have to move house because my husband got beaten up by the locals.
The cost for Seema Misra and her family was devastating. Like many others, she'd been ploughing her own money into the business to try and make up the discrepancy, but found herself sentenced to 15 months in prison while pregnant.
Going to the prison is a bad name to the family. I wanted to kill myself. Because of the pregnancy, I had another life inside me. I couldn't kill myself. Sorry.
How long did you spend in prison in the end?
Just under 4 months, and then I was released on tag.
It must have been terrifying as a pregnant woman who's never been in trouble before.
Not even a speeding fine. Not even a speeding fine. I'm so law-abiding person. And then I went into labour with my tag on. It was such an embarrassing moment. I think, what could be the midwife will be thinking, what kind of mother I am.
Vijay Parekh also went to prison for theft.
Crying every night. Don't see the children. And you are mixed with people who are not like what you've done.
But his punishment wasn't just carried out in prison, also the stigma that then followed.
My dad owned a post office where he grew up, in the area we lived in, and we moved from that area. We lost all that. And now finally he can hold his head up high again and be the person. You don't get those 10 years back. 10, 11, 13 years we've
14
lost.
years.
14 years, sorry. We won't get those back. But at least we can hold our head up high and walk again. And the post office took that from us.
The judgment today also found the prosecutions were an affront to justice, allowing for further claims for compensation. The Post Office is publicly owned. The Prime Minister today called the wrongful prosecutions an appalling injustice. In a statement, the Post Office apologised for its historical failures and said that it supported the overturning of the vast majority of convictions. Those affected now want a full public inquiry. Following today's exonerations and 6 others in December, it's the most widespread miscarriage of justice in the UK. But 736 people have convictions in total, many of them still waiting for their day in court, hoping they too can finally prove their innocence.
Anya Pop reporting. Well, I'm now joined by the Labour MP Darren Jones, who's chair of the Commons Business Committee, and the Conservatives Margot James, who was Postal Services Minister between 2016 and 2018. Thank you to both of you for coming on the programme. Margot James, if I may start with you. As we just said, you were Postal Services Minister for 2 years between 16 and 18. Did you do enough? Did you do enough to listen to the plight of these poor people who had their convictions quashed today?
Well, I wish I'd done more. So I suppose I would have to say that I probably didn't do enough. But for a start, I was only in that role for 18 months. And unfortunately, I had responsibility for both the Post Office and the Royal Mail. But that was in a myriad of many other responsibilities. And because the Post Office was still is, an arm's length organisation with an autonomous board and functions independent of government, I suppose there was less really that we we could really do than it would have been the case had it been wholly publicly owned and controlled by my department. But there's not, you know, I do really regret not actually spending more time on it. It took me quite some time to understand what was really going on, because for the first couple of meetings I had with the Post Office Board, and we didn't meet them very often, there were other things that were at the time higher priorities, and we were, I think, really in my department, I think we weren't fobbed off, but I mean the board did not really want to discuss this issue,
right,
and it gave us the impression that it was historic and it was under legal enforcement. But finally I did meet the representatives of the sub-postmasters and mistresses, and then I started to get greater clarity around what was going on.
I know it's a different issue, and the scale of it is slightly different, but it does sound a little bit like the Windrush scandal, you know, within the postal services. These were people that just weren't taken seriously. They should have been on your radar, and they weren't, and that's just an outrage.
Well, I mean, I think that really the whole history of this is absolutely outrageous. And people's lives, I would absolutely acknowledge, have been ruined for, you know, many years in some cases. And the length of time it has taken for justice to be done has been far too long.
Right.
That is very true.
Well,
and I don't think you should forget the role of Fujitsu in all this as well, because they sold the Post Office a system that was clearly flawed, and then obviously spent a great deal of effort trying to cover that up and make out to the Post Office that it was working perfectly all right, and it clearly wasn't.
I want to move on to you know, what happens now in terms of, you know, justice and accountability. But Darren Jones, the Labour Party was in power for 10 of the years in which this scandal was brewing. Labour didn't do enough either, did they?
Well, there's certainly an issue here about when government is a shareholder on a company like the Post Office, how that corporate governance is run properly with full transparency and accountability. And my committee's inquiry will be considering that later in this year once the independent review is concluded. But we have to pay tribute to the victims of this miscarriage of justice for campaigning so hard for so many years to get the judgment that they deserve today. And I hope that everybody else that's been affected by this will see full recompense for the tragic and traumatic processes they've been through over so many years.
But they would say that only half of the justice package has been delivered. Many of them now want to see accountability. They want to see the bosses of the Post Office that put them through the ringer punished. Is that going to happen, Darren Jones?
Well, the government's announced an independent review, which is currently being undertaken, but I agree with the sub-postmasters that that should have been a full judicial independent review with the power to summon witnesses and documents. My committee has been holding some of the leaders of the Post Office at that time to account, but we need to call them before the committee. And I agree with them. There should be justice, and the government needs to step up the independent review to ensure that it has the powers to do that.
Margaret James, do you want to see the people responsible in court?
Well, I certainly think, I agree with Darren that there should be an independent review with full powers to subpoena witnesses and documentation. Yes, I think there are too many lessons that need to be learned from this, as well as a proper compensation programme for the victims. I mean, nothing can compensate them for all the stress and worry that they have had over the years. Some people have even died whilst waiting for justice. So there's a limit to what financial compensation can achieve, but they should at least get that, and swiftly.